Today I am very excited to be talking with Dr. Andrew Gallimore. Now, Andrew is a computational neurobiologist, a pharmacologist, chemist, and the author of a number of articles and research papers on the subject of DMT. Together with Dr. Rick Strassman, Andrew developed a protocol for the controlled prolonged intravenous infusion of DMT, which is known as DMT-X. And this allows a subject to stay in hyperspace for an extended period of time. His current work focuses on DMT as a tool for gaining access to extra-dimensional realities, and he talks about this and many other psychedelic substances in his latest book, Reality Switch Technologies. Now, we go into all these topics here, as well as discussing how DMT is present prenatally in human fetuses, how it might explain near-death experiences, and what we know about endogenous DMT. And if all that wasn't enough, we also cover aliens, entities, hyperspace, and anything else you can think of relating to this extraordinary experience. So yeah, I think it's pretty obvious as to why I was excited to have this talk with Andrew. I mean, it all just happened a couple of hours ago. I am still completely buzzing from it. So without any further ado, I bring you Dr. Andrew Gallimore.
I thought I'd kick this off with, I saw that when I was watching a few of your videos on YouTube, you had a bit of a flair for kind of setting up the topic, bit of an icebreaker by having like a personal anecdote, which you like segue into the main discussion. So I thought I'd follow that pattern and share one of my own. So here we go. Absolutely true story. So my older brother is also called Andrew. And it was Big Brother Andrew who was the person who was responsible for introducing me to psychedelics. At a bit of a shockingly early age, I might add. So I'm not endorsing that aspect. But I was around about 13, and he was like quite a few years older, and he sort of gave me a tab of LSD and said, "Try this, bro. It's absolutely amazing. Just try this." And he was completely correct. It absolutely blew my mind. But basically, that event set in the kind of wheels in motion for this event, because here I am 30 years later with another Andrew, who I'm hoping is similarly going to blow my mind. And yeah, I was kind of thinking, is this like a coincidence? I think not. I was wondering, is there some kind of like league of Andrews out there, like sort of a secret cabal of like hyperdimensional interlopers, a bit like sort of from Rick and Morty, like the Legion of Ricks. So yeah, I just wanted to kind of put that out to you, Andrew. Is this a coincidence? Anything you want to confess, Andrew?
I don't know. I don't really know how to respond to that. I think I got into psychedelics older than that. I mean, 13, that is kind of young. I was doing other things at the age of 13. But I got into psychedelics probably when I was a teenager, certainly. I certainly became interested in them as a teenager, as I was kind of thinking about university and what are we going to do with our lives, that kind of thing. And for some reason, when I was really, really young, I was interested in the occult. I was interested in ghosts and vampires and werewolves. I have 4 brothers, 2 older brothers and 2 younger brothers. And the older ones used to mock me for believing in werewolves and vampires. I used to make little kits, like vampire, ward-off vampires, a little box, had a little cross in it and some garlic and a little tiny steak. That kind of thing. Was
there any particular strand of like the vampire lore that you were? Were you kind of like a Twilight person or a Bram Stoker person, or?
No, not really. I was interested in kind of the folklore surrounding vampirism and people turning into lycanthropy, people turning into other beings by night. That kind of thing, and that kind of morphed as I got a little bit older. As I got sort of 16, 17, I became more interested in what's going on inside the head and how we can use certain molecules to change the structure and the dynamics of our reality, and that kind of fascinated me. So that I kind of dived into studying chemistry and drugs, basically pharmacology. So this was the birth of the internet. So this would have been 96. So we didn't have the internet at our house at that time, but at the school where I was, they had an internet. They had just one internet. You had to go and get the cable.
There was only one back in '96. That's it.
Yeah, he had to go and get the cable from the IT man. I forget his name, which I remember, and he changed the password every day to log on. And I would go on there and I would search for DMT. This was I heard about this drug in a book at my friend's house when I was 15, 16. And it just said this drug DMT. It's like LSD, but it only lasts 15 minutes. And I thought that's cool. So my next job was to find out what DMT stood for. So I went to the local library and in a book of acronyms and abbreviations, and I found DMT, dimethyl terephthalate, which is plastic. It's a type of plastic. So I was completely off there. But for a while I thought that's what it was. And then when I finally got access to the internet, I started Googling, well, not Googling, Alta Vista. I was Alta Vistaing back in there. That's going back, man. I was Alta Vistaing DMT, and I came across the Lyceum, some of these old sites that don't exist now. The Lyceum Drug Information Center, I think it was called. I spent a lot of time on there. Each page took about 10 minutes to load, but I could spend a whole afternoon searching for information about these drugs. I just became obsessed with it. I started buying seeds from a company called Of the Jungle in California. They would ship these sort of allegedly psychotropic plants, and I would ship them. And then I had this grow lamp in my bedroom, and I was growing these plants and trying them. Most of them didn't really do anything, but it was fun. I loved it. And then a friend of mine came to school one day, and he had a magazine, and on the back cover of the magazine was an interview with this weird bearded guy called Terence McKenna, who you might have heard of. And it mentioned his favorite drug. He says his favorite drug was DMT. And so that started that. So I knew then that I found something that was going to be the focus of my attention. And it has been, really. I became known at the later years of school as this kind of boy who was interested in drugs, and that continued through to university when I went to study chemistry, of course, and pharmacology, and maintained this interest in drugs. Then I went to Cambridge and did a PhD in biochemistry, and then I've done postdoctoral work in neuroscience. So I think psychedelics it's an interdisciplinary field, in that you have to be something of a chemist, you have to be a bit of a pharmacologist, you have to be a neuroscientist, a little bit of a psychologist. It covers all of these things. So I've been spending the last 20 years or so kind of building myself up, learning all of these different disciplines. And then about 10 years ago, I started to actually spend more time writing about psychedelics. So I published a paper that got some attention and got me invited to some conferences where I lectured on DMT and my ideas about it. And that's what I've been doing since. And now I'm in Tokyo, all these years later, basically spending all of my time thinking and writing about psychedelics. There we go. To the present day.
A couple of things I'd like to unpack there. First of all, I think it's fascinating how it's the cultural element that's kind of started you on this journey. Because first I'd never heard of DMT until way later. It landed on my radar. Here's one where I've got to tip my hat to Joe Rogan. It was that kind of. I was quite late to it in that regard. I was wondering, for you to be coming across like a character like Terence McKenna so earlier, he was there in the background for me, but I didn't really realise it at first. Were you aware that he used to do a lot of collaborations with the Shaman and stuff? I don't know if you were part of the rave scene there going through the 90s, but I only realised afterwards that there was this voice that was talking in the background of a lot of rave tracks, and that was Terence McKenna. And again, it was just totally under my radar because I was just far too high on other things at the time to pay much attention. But I think I found it real interesting that this whole thing, this kind of psychedelic renaissance, which I think the perception is that it's fairly maybe the last 15 years or something, has actually had roots going a lot further back.
Yeah. I mean, as you say, Terence McKenna, he collaborated with a few different musical outfits. So this sort of electronic music and rave culture. He was very interested in that culture. But of course, this was in, as you say, the early 90s, and perhaps he really kind of appeared on the scene, I think, in the early 90s. But this was pre-internet, basically, so you couldn't YouTube him. If you wanted to listen to him, you either had to go to one of his concerts, one of his lectures, or one of his talks, or you could send off for tapes. They were selling tapes. So there's a company called Dolphin Tapes in the United States who would distribute the recordings. So it wasn't that easy, actually, to come across his voice, unless you just, as you say, you were listening to that Shaman record or Alien Dreamtime. There were a few releases out there where he was, because he has this beautifully kind of nasal voice like this, it's very kind of evocative kind of voice, hyperdimensional, that kind of thing. So it's instantly recognizable now. You wouldn't hear his voice and go, oh, who's that? It's obvious when you hear Terence McKenna exactly who you're listening to. But at the time, I guess it wouldn't have been. It just would have been this cool character narrating with this, characteristically kind of baroque and kind of eloquent rants and raves about DMT and these machine elves and hyperdimensional realities and that kind of thing. So certainly the psychedelic renaissance, as we now call it, has been accelerated by the internet and the fact that you can now go onto YouTube and find hundreds of Terence McKenna lectures, and there are other podcasts that are broadcasting his lectures. So at the time I was buying his books. I had to order special from the bookshop, True Hallucination and Food of the Gods. That was the only thing that I could read about Terence McKenna, apart from his website. Of course, he had his website, which is still there, levity.org, I think.
I don't think I've ever visited that.
Terence McKenna's Alchemical Garden at the Edge of Time, I think is what it's called. It's still all up there. He was a very early pioneer.
I remember a lot of stuff on VR that year when he was kind of way ahead of his time with what's it called? Is it Jared Lanier, the sort of dreadlocked sort of tech guru guy? And so he was very sort of like engaged with these technologies. And I think he saw how they were going to affect us way before. They say, while we were still asking the IT guy for the cable, he was like, "No, this is going to be world changing." So,
it's kind of interesting when I've listened to him talking about it, and he I remember once he spoke about the speed of his modem, and he says, "Yeah, I've got this 25 kilobits per second modem running here," and it's like, you never mention the speed of your modem, because in 20 years it's going to sound ridiculous.
It's interesting. There's a bit of a segue possibly there in bits to some of the stuff that we could talk about with the contents of your books. And I think, interestingly as well, I think a comparison is worth making is that I think this is probably, this is how most people have come across yourself, or at least people at my kind of level, outside of academia. And when I listen to a lot of your talks and a lot of your theories, I'd see like the next generation of sort of Terence McKenna-esque sort of, psychedelic rock stars. I don't know how sort of comfortable you are with that kind of label, but I mean it genuinely. And I think people like yourselves are needed to sort of be able to bridge that gap between the sort of, the sort of academic science talk and kind of, extrapolate the narrative into something else. And that was one thing that was the bit I really liked in Alien Information Theory, but and that was kind of what I want to pick your brains about today. But because I would have liked to have seen more of that. And I think you might be aware, Andrew, but this is not actually the first time we've communicated online. Back when I read Alien Information Theory, I wrote a sort of a mini review of it online, and I don't want to sort of shy away from that gorilla in the room. I will offer a little bit of backstory. At the time I read Alien Information Theory, it was Christmas last year, and I was staying with my in-laws for a week, so I was in a pissy mood. I was not the most receptive, and I was really looking for some escapism. And I would like, first of all, I just want to say the layout of this book and the design. I think it is a work of art. I thought the experience of this book is amazing. But I wanted more aliens, Andrew. I wanted, or at least more. I thought the last like chapter where we started going, it's like, my little vampire fang was popping out. I wanted to more of that. I'm currently on Reality Switch technology. I'm going to do a shameless plug for you here, Andrew, if my virtual camera will stop phasing things out. So yeah, I'm currently on Reality Switch Technologies, but I'm only about a quarter of the way through at the moment because I only received it a couple of weeks ago. So hopefully, my intention is not to make you try and repeat too much of the stuff that's in there, but certainly we'll use these as like a launch pad to the sort of conversation. There was just something you said before. I just want to tap into when you were talking about your fascination with like horror films and stuff like that, and these kind of transformations. That's something that I had a similar thing when I was a kid, but the thing that always fascinated me but absolutely terrified me was lycanthropy, so transforming into werewolves and stuff, and that in doing so the person would lose themselves in that transformation. If you think like the classic one like American Werewolf in London, if you've seen that, the guy's like going through a very painful and like loss of identity as this thing comes over. And that's kind of, I think, certainly I think is the fear that gets tapped into with a lot of these psychedelic experiences, like this fear of losing yourself, of transforming into something that is not quite me anymore. So I was wondering if that was like something that was kind of planted in there, or maybe there's something about psychedelic explorers that's kind of interested in these shifts of not just what you are seeing and the experience being fed to you, but the fundamental shift of like, I am becoming something else. Like, how do I feel about this? So I just wanted to just put a little flag in that. But yeah, I mean, let's talk about DMT, Andrew, because this seems to be your area of expertise. And first, I think when I've watched some of your talks or when I've been reading your books, I mean, I think your scientific background and your passion and your enthusiasm for these subjects is obvious, but there's something that I thought I detected in there, which was like a bit of, and I don't mean this in any kind of derogatory way at all. I think this is very good quality. A bit of playful mischief of sort of wanting to, just explore these things, see where they go. I think it certainly comes across in sort of like the spark that lights up in your eye when you talk about these extended state DMT things. So I kind of wanted to go there a bit, but so yeah, I think first of all, like as a good question, you covered like your background of how you got here, but what do you think makes DMT so special? Like why are we talking about DMT rather than the other psychedelics?
Well, for me, it's the most remarkable of the psychedelics for a number of reasons. So even if you think about the molecule itself, this naturally occurring, the simplest, in my opinion, the simplest structurally of all of the naturally occurring psychedelics, 2 steps from tryptophan. Tryptophan goes to tryptamine, goes to dimethyltryptamine. So it's extremely simple, and it's ubiquitous. So it's everywhere you look. You look out the window, there's probably half a dozen plants that contain DMT in varying concentrations. So we have this extremely common, almost ubiquitous molecule that's found all over the place. Everywhere you look, there's DMT. Dennis McKenna always says nature is drenched in DMT. Yes, there's that much of it around. And just coincidentally, it also happens to be this extremely efficient reality channel switch. Within seconds of inhalation of the vapor, your normal waking world is obliterated, and it is replaced with one that is bizarre, altogether different, altogether stranger, that bears no relationship whatsoever to our world, that emerges with ferocious intensity, with ferocious force. You're hurtled into this populated realm, filled with these intelligent beings that want to communicate with you. That, to me, is the most just that fact, without actually having, even if you've never taken DMT, that fact alone, the people reporting instantaneous transportation to an alternate, highly complex, hyperdimensional reality filled with intelligent beings, communicative intelligent beings, really intelligent beings, like extremely powerful, hyper-intelligent entities. That in itself is astonishing. This simple molecule that you find everywhere just happens to be such an efficient changer of our subjective world, of the structure of our reality. And it all happens so quickly. The brain seems very, very comfortable in the presence of DMT. It's not hanging around. It's not sticking to receptors for long periods of time. It goes in, it causes these dramatic effects, really dramatic effects, astonishing effects, and then you're dragged back out again. To me, that's just that's a remarkable thing. And the fact that it is so ubiquitous, the fact that it is everywhere, it leads you, it leads you on. It's like it's telling you something. There's some hidden message there in the ubiquity of this simple molecule and its properties. It's not some rare chemical that's cooked up in the lab of some clandestine chemist. This is a very, very common, naturally occurring psychedelic, the most common, I would say, by far, naturally occurring psychedelic.
So do you think that is like indicating some kind of bigger scheme to this, rather than just this happens just by chance? The experience that you've just described of this kind of, what we kind of colloquially refer to as like this as hyperspace. You think this kind of factors into a bigger narrative of what we are supposed to do with these substances, how they what they mean for our species, or how do you? I guess what I'm trying to get is like, what is your belief here about what is happening?
Ooh. I don't have a belief, and I'm always keen to point that out.
Is that a dirty word?
Yeah, I think as soon as you say I believe this, then people think that that's what you think is the truth, right?
Sure.
Like,
okay.
It almost sounds like you're a proponent of a particular religion or ideology, which I've always kind of railed against.
Okay, what would your what would be a possible hypothesis then?
Well, I mean, I'm certainly not the first person to consider the idea that there is some, at least minimally, it seems like there is some significance to the fact that that this ubiquitous, naturally occurring psychedelics just happens to be, or is, this efficient reality channel switch, and it's very tempting to speculate why that is the case. What's the connection here? Was DMT somehow implanted in our reality? This in the book Alien Information Theory, as towards the end, I do describe DMT as like an intelligence test, in that it's everywhere. The message is everywhere, but it cannot be read until a species such as ourselves reaches a certain level of cognitive and technological sophistication that they can identify this molecule. They can isolate it, they can purify it, and then they can learn how to use it. And all of that takes a high level of intelligence. We're certainly the only species by far on the planet that could actually use DMT, really. I mean, you can't just chew leaves because it is orally inactive. You have to isolate it. Certainly to get the full-blown DMT reality switch experience, complete transportation into this realm, you need to isolate it, you need to purify it to some degree at least, and then you need to learn how to use it. And so it feels like it's the development of a technology in a way, and that's how I treat it, in that we're at the stage now as humans where we're beginning to see DMT as a technology, not just a drug, not just a psychedelic, but as some technology for almost instantaneous communication with this very, very high level and much older a more sophisticated intelligence. And once you do that, once you begin to treat it as a technology, then you get away from a lot of the, I don't want to say new age, but there are a lot of things that kind of hold back treating DMT as a technology. People think you need to sit on a hand-woven rug facing east at the full moon, and light incense and all of this stuff. And I don't have a problem with this kind of ritualistic aspect. And certainly I don't have an issue with more traditional uses of DMT and like ayahuasca, for example. I think these are all valuable and should be protected. But I think there's a danger in that people seem to think that injecting DMT, for example, using an infusion like I propose with Rick Strassman, is somehow desecration. It's a desecration of this sacred molecule. But I think actually, if we do take seriously the idea that we could be communicating with some kind of intelligence, wherever it is, whether it's somehow within our consciousness or whether it is actually some other orthogonal dimension of some sort, it's not particularly diplomatic or respectful to kind of burst through into their world unbidden, uninvited, look around wide-eyed and go, oh, look at this, look at this, look at this, look at this, and then bugger off again, as we would say in the UK, right? That's not particularly, I don't think that's particularly respectful to the intelligence. So I think if we do treat it as potentially a tool for communicating with intelligence, then we should treat it as a technology. We should bring our best tools to the table, I always say. And if that means injecting somebody, if that means hooking somebody up to an infusion device and delivering DMT into their brain at a consistent rate, then that's what we should be doing. We shouldn't be attached to the old ways and think that they're somehow the best. Because it's nonsensical, of course. Extracting DMT from a plant is not a natural thing. That is a technology. This is chemistry. That's what we do as humans. So the idea that somehow that's okay, it's okay to extract it, but then you can only vape it with a little pipe. That's the only proper way to do it. It doesn't make any sense to me. It sort of doesn't hold any water, that way of looking at DMT.
Yeah,
and so, go on.
Yeah, I was going to say, I totally agree with that. I think it's very easy for people to say, yeah, like technology stopped here. So anything else is like say disrespectful. Sort of, we should just kind of keep it in this realm. I just wanted to unpack a couple of the words that you use here, because I think from reading your books, I think I've got an idea of where it is that you are on. Let's say the spectrum of weirdness in terms of we're kind of. I'm trying to avoid the belief word. But there's a few words which I think might be sort of. Yeah, I think could need a little bit more unpacking. So, in particular, like when you refer to things like aliens or reality, because I think for most people, also within the psychedelic community, then they're kind of landing somewhere on the line of either this is a completely local experience that is happening due to chemicals acting on your brain, or that this is some kind of hyperdimensional portal that's been opening and you are communicating like Jodie Foster in Contact to beings on the other side of the galaxy. And there's maybe a little bit of new age sort of stuff somewhere in the middle. And from what I gather from your stuff is there's a lot of stuff in there that seems to talk about this being localized effects. But as I think it seems like the localized universe you see is actually much bigger than what we're interpreting. So we're getting a filtered version of a much bigger experience, which is. So is it that what you are referring to as hyperspace, like the unseen things that are going on around us, and in fact that our whole 3D kind of universe is actually just like a subset of a vast thing. So I was wondering if you could just unpack, like, what do you mean by reality, and when you're talking about like the possibility of communicating something, like what are these things? As it like in the local or non-local way?
Okay, there's a lot there. So I think the first ever since I've been speaking about DMT, it's become something of my mantra, if you like. It's the only thing which I always insist upon as almost like an axiom of my thinking, which is that the world that you experience is constructed. Its informational structure and its dynamics are all represented in the brain. So even the world you're experiencing now is all, in a sense, in your head. Your brain is constructing it.
Yeah.
However, it's also modulated and informed by sensory information from the environment, which the brain uses to test basically its model. But the world that you experience is always in your head. So it's not, as people often say, is the DMT world real, or is it all in your head? It's always all in your head. Your brain is always constructing this model. So what this means is that this also applies in the DMT state, the DMT world, whatever its nature. In other words, whether you are truly communicating with some other intelligence, wherever that intelligence might be, or if it is purely fabricated by the brain. In both cases, it's built in exactly the same way. It's like if you dream of seeing a tiger. I speak about a tiger in reality switch technologies. If you dream about a tiger, the tiger is built in the same way in your brain as it is if you actually go to the zoo and you see an actual tiger. If you're hallucinating and you see a tiger in the corner of the room sleeping, even though the tiger isn't there as such, the model is there. The model in your brain. It's just it doesn't map to reality. It's not an adaptive model. It's not properly informed by sensory information. So that's really what a hallucination is. So going back to DMT, this means that the DMT worlds, whatever their nature, are always constructed by the brain. So the question then becomes not is it in your head or not, but is it being modulated by information from some other place? So just like the world, our normal waking world, we consider to be real because it's modulated by sensory information. It's constantly being tested against information from the environment. That's what we consider to be real. Now, DMT then, we ask the question, is there some other place? Does DMT somehow gate access to information? Does it gate the flow of information from some other place, which the brain then models as the DMT space? That's the question here. Now, this naturally leads on then to if the DMT world, if there is some other place that the brain is receiving information from, where is that other place? Is it some other dimension? As I talk about in alien information theory, is it some orthogonal dimension that our brain doesn't normally have access to, but does for certain reasons when DMT enters in the brain? Is it gating the flow of information from deep unconscious structures? People like this idea, by the way, and I don't discount it, but it's often spoken about in a very kind of hand-waving way. People say, "Oh, it's from the unconscious mind." What does that mean? What is the structure of this unconscious mind? Or they say the collective unconscious. And again, there's a lot of bad, woolly, loose thinking. So when you start talking about consciousness, particularly when you start talking about Jungian psychology, because most people don't really understand it, what Jung was talking about when he said the collective unconscious or the personal unconscious. My next book actually is all about this, so I won't say too much about that. But I think, that's really the most important question to answer is where is the information coming from that is being used to inform this model? Because your brain evolved to construct one model of the world, right? Your brain evolved to construct this model of the environment, and it took evolutionary epochs to achieve this. It also takes all of the from the moment you kind of emerge from the womb, your brain is refining this model. So it's all through development, all through experience. Your brain is refining its model of the world. So your brain only knows really how to construct one world, or it should only know how to construct one world. And yet, when this simple molecule enters your brain suddenly, and with beautiful efficiency, begins constructing this bizarre hyper-technological reality that has no relationship. Nothing from this world is taken into this DMT world. It seems to be completely disjoint. It's a completely unexpected, unpredictable, unanticipated world. And the fact that the brain can construct it so effortlessly in the presence of this molecule is not easy to understand, right? It's not just enough to say, oh, you're just hallucinating. It's just your brain on drugs, man. I hear that all the time, and it really annoys me because people don't really understand the implications of what's going on here. They don't understand how fucking wild it is that your brain is suddenly constructing these hyperdimensional realities when it's perturbed by this simple molecule. It's a remarkable thing. It's like I sometimes describe it as like a young British child suddenly switching to speaking fluent Siberian Yupik, or fluent Mandarin or something, having never been exposed to the language. It's like, well, where did you learn to speak that? Doesn't make any sense. This is inexplicable. It's the same kind of thing, but in terms of world building, the way that your brain constructs worlds.
Yeah. So there's a couple of bits I just wanted to clarify, maybe for the audience, or at least draw your attention to. So I think when you talk a lot around information coming in, and I don't think what you're saying is anything close to the kind of the idea that we are receiving. This idea that we are TVs receiving information. So if my understanding is correct, there is a biological side going in. We are generating information, but then there is under the influence of something like DMT, there is a new stream of information which is being fed in as well. Am I on the right track there?
Yes, so that would be the case. So information, so sensory information is are these patterns of electrochemical signals that enter via the eyes and the ears and the skin, etc. The touch and the photoreceptors in the eye, they convert photon energy into electrochemical signals, which then pass into the brain. The brain then uses that information to modulate its model of the world, to kind of test its model and check that its model is actually working. And so, yes, the implication here would be if this DMT world is real, you're not going anywhere. That's the key point. You're not going to another world. In fact, what's happening, so I always say, you're not breaking through into another world. The other world is breaking through into you. Yes, it is taking over your brain's world-building machinery, and it is building its world using your brain. That's the key here. It's a flow of information into your brain, and then your brain uses that information to construct this model of that space, which we experience as the DMT world.
And I think there's something else that you talk around in the book, where it's not just the presence of information, but also the format of this information, or at least our ability to process that information becomes sort of increasing somewhere. And I think that the terms you use of this is like, or the example is this grid and hypergrid sort of idea of like, as I speak to you now, I am processing sort of information on a fairly flat plane, but then suddenly if these things were kind of like folded or stacked on top of each other, and then things are flowing in now in multiple directions, then my idea of what even isn't possible and the kind of the worlds that are now available to be built become infinitely more complex, and that's kind of pretty much what happens within the DMT experience. And I would completely share your frustrations with the kind of like, it's just a drug, because it doesn't fit the archetype of like things getting mushy or things getting distorted. Right. The level of complexity is like, I mean, it's hilariously funny how complex it is, because it's just you realize how limited you are in the face of such complexity, which is can be a truly startling experience.
It is startling, and you're right. It's not like sometimes I think of it like one of those old TV sets, with the dial.
Oh yeah, I had one of those.
Yeah, we had one in the kitchen in our house, a little black and white one. And when you turn the dial at first, you get kind of static, and then the screen, the image completely breaks down and becomes noisy, right? There's the disorder. But then as you keep turning, suddenly you get this new channel crackles into view, because the TV set is starting to receive information on a different frequency, basically, and it's that kind of thing. It's not, your brain isn't just creating, it's not just becoming more chaotic, more disordered. That happens at first. You get this increase in disorder, and then it kind of settles into an entirely new pattern of activity, which is highly ordered. Anyone who tells you the DMT world is disordered hasn't broken through properly, because it is highly ordered. Yes, it's complex. It's astonishingly complex and apparently hyperdimensional, but it's not disordered. It can feel like a disorderly experience, and as you're kind of hurtled through these strange domains, and everything's moving very, very quickly and fast, and so much information, so much complexity, so much strangeness. But no one ever describes it as disordered or chaotic. And really, what they describe is extremely high complexity. So it's a new order is emerging in the DMT state in the brain.
Yeah.
Not disorder.
I have heard sort of people, and I've certainly even had this experience myself, of it, there can be, I don't know if disordered would be the accurate word for it, but there's a feeling of increased anxiety and of being sort of a certain chaotic nature, as though you're being, as reality begins to fragment. And this is normally at the sort of at the pre-breakthrough, sub-breakthrough doses. So I think once you hit the breakthrough, then it becomes as ordered and complex as we described. But before that, while you're in this kind of in-between space, it can be like, am I here or am I there? And some of the DMT effects are kind of kicking in, so you can get these kind of parallel timelines feeling, but you're kind of sat there in your bedroom or something. So it can get these feelings of like, where am I here? Am I there? Who am I? What am I? And it can get very strange. Which is why it always gives this thing of sounding like a bit of a lunatic. But it's like, you've got to go for the big experience. This is not something you can really toe dip into. But yeah, I mean,
take the third hit, man. Take the third hit.
Terence knew what he was talking about. So I mean, yeah, like you say, the language you use for describing this world building machine, I think is it very resonates with me, because that is, you have this fully featured, fleshed out world, often which seems like it's beyond the capabilities of your own imagination. So I guess then that kind of would come to my question, like. Do you think, is this something that you think could be a switch that is being flipped? Like this is a biological piece of like software, or for you would it be like, no, this is a stream of data that is coming from through some other means?
So that's the great question, right? Is the brain actually capable of constructing these realities without input? It's like when you go to sleep at night, you have dreams. Everybody, even when they say they don't, they almost always do, except in some very rare cases. Everyone dreams, let's say, and when you're dreaming, your brain is constructing these perfectly coherent world full of, all five senses are intact in most people's dreams. It feels and is experienced just like the normal waking world, in a sense, for the most part. But it's all done without any sensory information input. So the brain knows how to build a world. It knows how to build what we call normally the consensus world, the world it has been, it has evolved to build, the world it has been refining in its construction over millions of years, really, up to the modern day. So your brain, is perfectly happy in constructing the world, right? Without sensory information. So then the question is, is the brain also capable of constructing these completely different, extremely bizarre and complex worlds that have no relationship to our world? If you accept that, and that's what I struggle to accept, then you can say, okay, somehow DMT, it's perturbing this highly complex system that is our brain, and causing a new pattern of activity to emerge, which happens to appear like a highly complex alternate reality. some people might accept that. For me, I'm not so sure. Doesn't really make that much sense to me. On the other hand, if we do entertain the idea, at least, that we could be accessing some other reality, some other domain, then yes, then it starts to make sense. Then you can imagine that there is some flow of information that's entering the brain in the presence of DMT. When DMT perturbs the brain, it alters the patterns of neural activity such that it can begin to receive this information. It's similar to or analogous to, but it's not the same, as the idea of resonance. And you can alter the structure of a metallic object and get it to ring at a different frequency, and then sound waves at that frequency will also make it ring. You get this resonance effect. So if you imagine that in a much more complex way, where the patterns of information being generated by the brain are in some way resonating. Again, I use that word like this because it's not really resonant, but it at least gives you an idea of what's going on here, and that the brain can, for some reason, only begin to receive this information from elsewhere in the presence of DMT, when the neural activity has been highly specifically perturbed by the presence of this molecule.
I think as well as the kind of the world building that's going on, there is a change in the experience as well. So it's not just a case of like putting on a VR set and experience something else. It feels almost like some kind of like new sense or some new aspects of consciousness are being turned on. And I think this is why I really liked your talk of the sort of the grid and the hypergrid, because information it feels like it's flowing in a different way. There is stuff here that I can now comprehend, which was incomprehensible before. And whereas like personality wise, I feel like it's me. I don't feel clouded or fuzzy or sort of drunken in any sort of way. It's completely me, but it's me 2.0 or probably me 94.0 or something like that. It's many versions ahead of my current operating system.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean that kind of that feel of information flowing, I think orthogonally, I think is how you described it, and in sort of much more complex.
Yeah.
I am an IT guy by trade and career, so I very much liked the sort of the stuff around Conway's sort of game of life and how. I thought your example of how those kind of interactions, when sort of stacked into more complex things, could give rise to incredibly complex behaviour or incredibly complex patterns, I should say. So there's that's the part that fascinates me is this new ability, let's say, that comes online. Not just the kind of that there's new information or a new world to explore, but that I myself am new in a way to explore it. And I just wonder if you have any sort of thoughts on that, on what is happening with these abilities that come online.
Yeah, I mean, so a lot of people describe what appear to be what Terence McKenna and Dennis McKenna used to describe as impossible objects, things that are not just strange or difficult to understand, but that things that are actually impossible, that could not possibly exist in our universe, in our three-dimensional plus time universe. And so that hints towards the kind of structure of this space, and that it might be some orthogonal dimension that actually does. It suggests that our little universe is kind of a very thin slice of a high-dimensional structure. So in alien information theory, I talk about, I bring it down to the 2D plane, and the idea of that if someone's living in a 2D plane, like a flatland world, then if they suddenly got access to the third dimension, if their brain suddenly became three-dimensional effectively, it would be completely confounding. I mean, it would be, so this is. I could never have imagined this. This doesn't make any sense, and it would be astonishing and shocking and horrifying in equal measure for them to experience this. And I get the feeling that that's what, certainly in my case, and in many other people who smoke DMT, take DMT, is this sense of the impossibility of it. It's not just highly complex. It's impossible. There are impossible structures within the space. They see all sides of objects at once. They see objects that seem to possess many more dimensions than the normal three-dimensional structures that we're familiar with, and it's impossible for them to even comprehend what these structures are, and so that's why I suggest I explore in some depth in early alien information theory is this idea that our reality is a thin slice of some higher dimensional structure. There's many more dimensional structure, and what's happening when you smoke DMT is effectively you are becoming your brain. You get the emergence of this hyperdimensional brain. Basically, your brain becomes part of this high dimensional structure for a brief time, because it starts to receive information from these orthogonal dimensions. So it becomes your brain becomes a 5 or 6 or 7 dimensional object from your own subjective perspective, at least. Of course, people in this reality still only see the 3 dimensions, of your head. If they could open your skull and look at your brain, it would still look like a 3D brain. But of course, it's actually receiving information from these orthogonal dimensions, dimensions that exist effectively at right angles, if you like, to the 3 dimensions of our space. That would explain why people tend to feel like they are indeed entering a high dimensional structure, because they are, if I'm correct.
I just wanted to go back to, because you mentioned Terence and Dennis McKenna there, and sort of their talk around these impossible objects, and often they would refer to them as objects singing themselves into existence. And I'd wonder what you could just pick your brains on what you think of this. You've talked about resonance. There does seem to be this relationship between sound and this experience. Very typically, sort of, codified within like the shamanistic practices of people are singing to the experience and manipulating the experience in a variety of ways and for a variety of purposes through channeling this singing. And there's the famous example of Terence and Dennis doing this, trying to literally break reality by conjuring something into this universe which would just collapse the entire program. But that then does have this kind of roots in this traditional aspect. And I just wondered, like, where does from the science point of view, where do you sort of brush up against that or collide with that? Because there is there is something about these what's going on in these traditional experiences where you think, these guys are onto something. This seems to me that it's interacting in a way which is more than just pleasant sound. I think when you get into the hardcore study of something like DMT, and as you're saying, trying to come fully prepared to attract the guests, so that we're not just throwing a stick at them and trying to we're like, hey, no, we're taking this seriously. Does that factor in anywhere to what you were researching?
I mean, it's not really my field, but I'm certainly open to the idea. I mean, certainly sounds enter the brain. They are affecting neural activity. When you hear something, of course, that's what's happening. Your brain is being stimulated by these sounds, and certainly the brain is very much an oscillatory structure. It generates and is regulated by a large number of electrical oscillations, which are very important in maintaining certain patterns of activity. It's important in regulating the timing of activity and partitioning activity. All controlled by these short and long wavelength oscillations that are going on all the time in the brain. And so certainly I'm open to the idea that in the DMT state, or any state really, that you can use perhaps the correct frequency of sound wave, and that will affect the ongoing changes in neural activity that's also being elicited by the drug itself. But I don't know if there's been that much. I mean, certainly there's studies of like binaural beats, right? The idea that we can separate the frequency, of a slight difference between the frequency, and your brain kind of fills in the gap, and you get these new oscillations being generated. So that's certainly being explored. But like academic studies looking at how sound modulates the psychedelic state, that would be really fascinating to see. But I don't think anyone's done it. I think we're a little early in the psychedelic renaissance for people, certainly kind of mainstream academic types, to be doing these kind of experiments. But certainly, yeah, I'm open to the idea that you could manipulate the psychedelic state in a reproducible way, and it might help actually to control the DMT state. I know some people say that certain sound frequencies for them, or even kind of vibrating chairs and things at certain frequencies, helps them to kind of lock in to a certain state, into a certain area perhaps of the DMT space, or helps to stabilize the state in some way. But yeah, it's a field of research that's not really taken off yet.
I just think it would be some way to connect these worlds together, because I think, I mean, I was, when I started getting into all this kind of stuff, I was kind of very dry and skeptical as to all this stuff. I was kind of just coming at it from a purely, wow, this is an amazing experience kind of view. And then, I'm almost sort of embarrassed to say, but I did have these kind of like spiritual experiences where I kind of recognize, oh wow, there is a state here as human beings which is accessible, which we could call spiritual, and I got what these people were talking around, who were coming from that angle, and that was a jarring for me, because I was like, I was a diehard like militant Richard Dawkins chomping atheist at that point, and I still am. Absolutely, I think Richard Dawkins is awesome. But
I love Richard Dawkins.
But I had to sort of rewire my worldview a little bit, and so when a lot of these things, like the stuff of the healing sort of aspect, the singing aspect, the traditional aspect, this kind of these what people talk about, it was sacred. There is something there, and I wonder, certainly from my talking with other sort of scientists and being at other conferences, it does seem like the attention is firmly on the effect and the experience, but not so much like the human experience. And I'm wondering if something's kind of like getting left behind in the look at just what's kind of happening in terms of these worlds. So do you have sort of, these kind of, do you look at it as a kind of a use the term like technology before, like I would use the term as like it's a kind of form of like spiritual technology, it's a kind of soul technology. It's more than just sort of cognitive stuff going on. So yeah, I just wonder if you had any thoughts around that.
Well, I often get criticized for focusing on the more not really out there, but the kind of the alien stuff and the idea of the alien worlds, and but that's just because that's what makes me itch, as Alan Watts used to say. That's what gets me out of bed in the morning. That's what I'm interested in, and that's kind of become my niche, is to think about the more, I guess, science fiction-y.
Yes, it's a new vampires
of DMT. Yeah, maybe something like that. But I don't. So I've never written about traditional ayahuasca usage, for example, except in passing, mentioning it. So I'm certainly doing a disservice to it. And I think there are plenty of people who are very interested in ayahuasca and are interested in the plant spirits and the traditional usage of ayahuasca, and the ethnography of ayahuasca, and the types of beings that these indigenous people, when they use ayahuasca, meet, and that's all very cool stuff, but it's just kind of not my field, I think. And then there's the more academic scientists, well, that's the wrong word, the kind of the more modern hard scientists, if you like, rather than the more kind of anthropological scientists who are very interested in clinical aspects now, and that's become the main thrust of psychedelic research, and reasonably so. I think psychedelics will be revolutionary as they're developed. They will become revolutionary treatments for treatment-resistant depression and anxiety and post-traumatic stress disorder, all that kind of thing. So I understand that, but I'm kind of in something of a privileged position in that I'm not attached any longer. I've cut the final thread of academia, so I'm not affiliated with a university anymore. I'm not restricted in that way. I don't have to find funding, for example, to do my work. I think and I write and I generate ideas and I think about possibilities and I talk to people like you about them, and I write about them. I write books about them. I write articles about them. I write tweets about them. These kind of things. So that's how I see my role, really. I'm not. I maintain this thread that's firmly attached still to academic science, whilst kind of exploring. It's like astral projection, right? The silver cord that attaches you to your body. So that silver cord is attaching. Sorry, it's a terrible analogy, but it came to me. It's that cord or 1 foot. I'm keeping 1 foot in the scientific arena whilst exploring these other domains, and that's kind of how I see my particular role here. I'm not one of these new agers or people who just go off and can, anything goes, like the plant spirits or the spirit world or the astral plane or all of these new age ideas. That they don't have a scientific underpinning. They have a mystical underpinning, which is fine. I don't have a problem with that. That's not my thing. So what I'm able to do is use maintain a scientific underpinning to everything I write about. So actually, this could be true. This could be true. Have you thought about this? What if this is the case? This doesn't make sense. We can't explain this. What could be the explanation? And then I talk about several explanations, some wilder than others. But I'm in no danger of someone going, "Oh, we're going to cut your funding because this is ridiculous." So I'm completely free in that sense, and that was always the plan, was to cut myself out of the academic world after having milked it dry, having milked it for all I could get out of it. Right? I've learned all the stuff. I'm proficient in neuroscience and in pharmacology and in chemistry and other things. So I've got everything I need. I've got all the equipment and the tools. The cognitive.
You're playing 4-dimensional chess with them, and now that you've beat them, Andrew, you're completely free. But I actually think, with at least with some of the sort of traditional guys I talk to, I actually think that your work aligns completely with them. So I think it's just a linguistic thing. What they're calling spirits, we're calling aliens, and we call it hyperspace. They call it the spirit world, but. I've talked to these guys who talk about UFOs appearing in the jungle, and it's interesting, particularly with your work around extended state DMT, because that's kind of in some way that's what these guys are doing. They're taking or drinking all these MOIs, they're doing ayahuasca like every night, and so they're kind of putting themselves into a state of an extended state of DMT. And I appreciate it's a different thing to what you're doing. It's not the same. There's other things at play there, but it does mean that you end up in a place where you start having to relearn a different reality, and they just kind of see, sometimes just aliens appear, and that's just what happens in the jungle. And so I think that there's a lot of common ground there. But I can certainly understand your position of what you're doing is a different thing. And I did see on one of your videos that you do get frustrated when there's kind of people compare like the extended state DMT to like, oh, why have you never heard of ayahuasca, Andrew? And and I would agree these are different things. But I did want to ask a little bit, like, because obviously ayahuasca is one way of getting these kind of extended states, but then there's these other pharmaceutical ways. And is that when you get some of these pharmaceuticals which are apparently quite clean in the MAOI effect, Is that, would you see that as something different? I mean, I'll ask a question, then I'll backtrack a bit. Is that something different to your extended state DMT? And first of all, can you explain what extended state DMT is? Because I don't think we've done it yet.
Okay, I'll explain what extended state DMT is, and that will lead us on to the first question. We're going to go backwards a bit. So basically, the normal DMT experience, which is traditionally, well, not traditionally, but in the modern era at least, is smoked, right? Vaporized. Shouldn't be smoked. Vaporized. But it lasts about 5 minutes. What happens in the brain, basically, very quickly, levels rise in the brain. They reach a peak, which is very high. It's normally about 5 times higher than ayahuasca. So there's the first difference. In a breakthrough state, you break through, you're in there, it kind of stabilizes for a minute or so, really, and then it starts to come down. And as it comes down, you pop out for space again. So it's very brief. Up and down. This is its pharmacokinetic profile, and this has been measured. So what DMT does is it reaches a concentration in the brain very quickly, then it's cleared very quickly. It doesn't have subjective tolerance. It means you can inject someone repeatedly with DMT, and they will have the same effect each time, spaced by 30 minutes or something. And Rick Strassman did that study in the 90s, so we know that. So basically, it occurred to me that if we want to extend the DMT experience longer than 5 minutes or so, we need to maintain a stable brain DMT concentration, and that is routinely done, not with DMT, but in anesthesia. So anesthesiologists, they use a short-acting anesthetic. They have a machine hooked up to your veins, and they deliver this programmed infusion rate of drug into your bloodstream. The idea being that it reaches your brain and it stabilizes. You maintain this anesthetic drug in the brain, and then they can push you deeper into the anesthesia, bring you into a lighter anesthesia, and at the end, they shut off the machine. And so it occurred to me, okay, we can use this same technology. Just as long as we have blood data for DMT, we know its pharmacokinetic profile, we can design the same protocol, but for DMT instead of an anesthetic drug. It's a very simple idea, really. So that's when I wrote to Rick, my friend Rick Strassman, who you've also heard of course, who did the study in the 90s, and I said, Rick, I've got this idea. Do you have the blood data that I've seen in one of your papers? I saw a graph in your paper, the level of DMT in the blood over time. Do you have the original data from the subjects? Fortunately, he had it tucked away in some Excel file somewhere. So we started there. We then collaborated. I did the modeling, and then we generated this pharmacokinetic model. We basically, proof of principle, we showed, yes, this is possible with DMT, and we published it. That was in 2015, 16 now, so a few years ago. So that was kind of my input. So the subsequent people have then taken up the idea and actually started implementing it now in humans, which they're doing with at Imperial College particularly, have just finished their first trial of DMTX for 30 minutes. It's kind of a small study, but hopefully they will be extending that. So that's the principle of DMTX, bringing someone to the DMT space for as long as you want, an indefinite period of time, by maintaining a stable brain DMT concentration, pure DMT, no MAO inhibitors or anything like that, and being able to control the level of the state over time. So it's very different. It's much more precise and controlled than ayahuasca. So even with ayahuasca, yes, it stays in your body and brain a longer period of time, but it still goes up, still plateaus, and it still kind of comes down. It's not the same, and it's normally much lower, and it's normally accompanied by vomiting and shitting and other kind of pleasantries.
You don't have to tell me. I always have to take plenty of spare underwear with me. But it reminded me. I actually had a sort of friend, like someone who watched a few of my videos. He got in touch. He was trying to recreate that same effect, but by creating a kind of gas mask connected to a series of thermal pads wired up to a timer, so that it would every 5 minutes one of these timers would go off, and using sort of Arduinos or something would heat one of these pads and just feed something into the mask. Much less precise. I don't think he actually ended up going there with it, but he was a bit of a mad inventor. But
yeah, masks are a bit dangerous, I think. Putting masks over your face is always, unless you're an anesthesiologist, an expert in getting the oxygen mix right, you can end up, you'll be dead you'll be on the DMT, in the DMT world permanently.
Yeah, I think it was a famous case of someone who appeared on Hamilton's Pharmacopoeia, wasn't it? The person who was big into xenon gas, and they'd kind of got the mix wrong, and that sort of resulted in a fatality. So yeah, kids, just don't put DMT gas masks on. But in regards to the kind of like the cleaner MAOIs, so you would see that I grant the profile would certainly be different, because you wouldn't get this kind of like fast in fast out thing, but the experience, like say the plateau of the experience, would you see as that has been different with a, like say, a pharmaceutically clean MAOI and delivered in a fairly precise dosage with subsequent precise dosages of DMT? Would you see that as a different experience?
Yeah, I mean, it's somewhere between ayahuasca and DMTX, I think. And you are, to some extent, stabilizing the state, but it isn't the same. You don't get the same level of control, because you're relying on absorption through the gastrointestinal tract, which is variable.
Well, it could be done with a vapor rig, though. I mean, so you could.
You could, yes. I mean, certainly some people actually, as kind of an aside, use smoke these Harmala, Peganum Harmala seeds, like a bowl of these Peganum Harmala seeds.
Syrian
Get the
rue,
name in English. That's the Latin.
Yeah,
that's it. Yeah, Syrian rue. Before, like 20 minutes before, they smoke DMT, and then they smoke DMT, and then the experience lasts for 30 minutes to an hour. Apparently, it's very, very intense. So I'm not saying that this is the only way to do it, but it's the most regulated and easy to control technique. I think it seems like the pinnacle of what we're able to achieve in terms of drug administration technologies, rather than relying on using MAO inhibitors and stuff. But certainly someone at home who wants to explore the space, then I think the best tools, we have some great tools now that have been largely discovered by kind of citizen scientists, these DMT nexus people, these like e-liquid vape things now, the vape pen, right? I think if you do that well, you get a good quality vape pen and dissolve your DMT in a good quality e-liquid. This is a very efficient and clean way to use DMT, and you can actually control it as well. You can take small or large hits. You can keep hitting. You don't have to worry about open flames and glass pipes and setting the house on fire or anything like that. It's a very safe way of doing that. And then if you mix that in with a MAO inhibitor of some sort, it could be Syrian rue, or it could be a pharmaceutical MAO inhibitor, then you can actually spend a longer period of time. I mean, it's not quite as well controlled as DMTX, but it's the same idea. So I'm not against. I'm all for people exploring different modes of administration, different ways of taking DMT and using DMT.
I think the thing with the vape pens, it does tie into this feel of technology, like, I am engaging with a piece of mind technology through this piece of vaping technology, and it is just so much more efficient and convenient than the old kind of glass pipe, very easy to burn, very easy to drop it on yourself and burn a hole in the couch and stuff like that. So it does map very well, I think, onto the experience. And from a convenience point of view, I think they're amazing. It's so much easier to use. I've got quite a large collection of these vaping tools, and they're I've got plenty of videos on my channel gushing about how useful I find them. So I just want to kind of come back a little bit to then the idea of DMT as this kind of form of test. And there's a couple of bits that I found interesting there. There was a quote, I think, let me just find the quote. Yeah, here we go. So I think this is from Alien Information Theory, where he's saying that all humans are destined to become fully immersed within the grid. And also that it was only humans so far who have achieved this this technology. Now, I would totally agree in terms of all the humans who are vaping DMT, but I'm going, diving a little bit into my own experiences here. Then one of the experiences which I've certainly had, and I've heard commonly reported, is that the feeling that not only are you in communication with sort of higher dimensional entities like the DMT, the elves, whatever you want to call them. I'm not big on the elves language, but those entities, but that also other living conscious systems are present. And the way I kind of imagine this was as DMT as a kind of, and I'll go back to our early 90s analogies here, internet analogies, is that it feels to me like a kind of an AOL chat room for consciousness. It's kind of, if the kind of the problem being that consciousness is so diverse, distances between galaxies are too vast. I have trouble, not that I spend a huge amount of time trying, but communicating with an ant in my backyard, never mind being on Tau Ceti or something. So that really there needs to be something which can make sort of conscious systems meet in the middle somewhere, and that technology that enables that, and the space that is generated, the virtual space that is generated, is the DMT realm. And so I kind of wanted to just kind of, I don't know, when I was, it did seem like there was a little bit of human centricity there in your work, and I was wondering, like, do you see? I was wondering, I guess, is DMT the exclusive route to this thing, or is it just one of many routes? Again, which still fits into the model of it being a test, but certainly I've had the feeling like I've been encountering plants and dolphins and intergalactic bumblebees and all sorts of weird stuff in there. I'm just wondering if any of that kind of came across in your own experiences.
I think so that part of the book I'm talking about, DMT as this intelligence test, the idea that it is a message that's been implanted in this high dimensional digital reality, and that's what the whole book is leading to, the idea that there is some aim to humanity, if you like. There is some goal, that the reality we're experiencing now is some kind of game, this huge cosmic game, and that it might be possible to go from a temporary entering of the DMT space into something more permanent, and there might be this. I mean, this is where I'm not talking about my beliefs. This is where I am really just pushing my ideas and saying, okay, let's take this where it leads. This is one direction it might lead. The idea, some people have described it as ascension, effectively, that humans will ascend into the celestial realms, right? And there's a lot of kind of echoes of certain religious ideas there. That wasn't intentional. Peter Sjöstedt Hughes, the philosopher, wrote a critique of my book, and he pointed out that it was a Christian narrative, basically, the idea that we're going to ascend into heaven at some point, and that life on Earth is this series of tests, and that never occurred to me when I was writing the book, not consciously anyway. But I get the feeling that there's a strong sense for me and for most people, many people, when they take DMT, that this place is home in a way. It feels like you're returning home. It's a place where you've been before, but you don't remember when. There's this powerful sense of deja vu that's kind of unshakable, this sense of deja vu, and there's a comical ambience there. There's all these different qualities, but there's a sense that you're being drawn into this space, that they're kind of playing with you. They're kind of saying to you, "Do you get it yet? Do you get the joke? Have you worked it out?" And it's like, maybe not yet, and you go away again, and then come back, and it's the same thing. And so the culmination of that, in my opinion, is when we do get the joke, when we do get what it's all about, and that then might be the catalyst for permanent transference. In the book, I call it, what do I call it? Resolution, like the resolution of the game. The different stages: information, complexification, emergence, I forget them now. I've gotten the contents of my own book. But anyway, but this final stage, the resolution of the game, we go from the stage of recognizing that it is a game, learning how to play it and what the ultimate goal of the game is. And then that final stage is resolution. This is when there is this transmission of the informational structure of our consciousness, of ourselves, permanently into this higher dimensional realm. So we would kind of transfer ourselves permanently into the DMT space. But that's just, I certainly don't believe that that's the case, but I'm just exploring. The world is stranger than we can suppose, as Terence McKenna often used to say. It wasn't his phrase originally, but anyway, or queerer than we can suppose. And so I think we need to be supposing more and thinking about possibilities, not just kind of complete science fiction, but having some kind of thread through it that is at least linked to what we know about DMT, what we know about the brain, what we know about the structure of our reality. Then we start to think, okay, what could this all be leading to? What are the possible explanations for what we're dealing with here? What we're dealing with here with this very, very curious molecule, and the narrative that I expound in Alien Information Theory is just one possibility. It's my vision of reality. It's not my belief that this is the way. I found the secret. I never trust anyone that tells you that, because they're universally bullshitters, right?
Definitely agree with you, Andrew.
Make that clear.
Absolutely.
So anyway, I don't have any time when people tell me this is actually what, people often fight with me, not fight physically, but they fence with me on social media and stuff. I say, oh, you've got it all wrong about actually this is what DMT is. This is what it's doing. And I don't have any time for it. I rarely even engage, because anyone who tells you they've got a handle on what DMT is and what it means and its relationship between our world and their world, anyone really tells you they understand that, know that.
Well, not only that, I think they completely missed the point of the, that to me is one of the kind of the points of DMT. I mean, again, to quote Terence, you really don't know shit, and it's humbling to be reminded of that, and it's so boring to have the answer to the it's this. I would just find so tedious. I'd be disappointed. So I think having all these different possibilities is, I think, again, I totally agree. It's not to you believe everything, and so your brain you're so open minded your brain falls out of your ear, but I think there are certain tantalizing threads that it kind of calls upon you to pull on, like, oh, look at this, there's a little bit of juice here that you can
that's it,
you can get using. And just to come back to what you said around the experience of familiarity, I remember the first time I had it, I felt stupid. I felt embarrassed that I didn't realize it was going to be like this. That it was like, of course it's duh. What else were you expecting? Of course it's going to be this hyperspace carnival, which and like you said, the feelings of deja vu were just I mean it's almost overwhelming. And I'll to come away from this kind of like idea of like what do you believe, but I can certainly I can share what I was told during one, and again, that's not to say I believe it, but it does conjure up these kind of ideas of that, we have been here before. We are kind of scouting now, and that's the kind of the purpose of our human life, is to scout out and report back, and that's the kind of the re-upload of information back into that is the transition, basically. The end of our human life is that way. So rather than sort of like there being what's that thing that lots of Americans believe in, that sort of when Jesus comes and you all start floating up to the sky, the kind of ascension.
Oh, is it seventh?
I don't know, but they've got a word for it, haven't they? Where you all ascend, and I can't remember.
Oh, you're talking about the.
Yeah.
Oh God! Everyone's shouting at the screen now. Come on, it's obvious. The
Jesus floaty. It's called the Jesus floaty. That's not.
Yeah. You mean like at the
Yeah,
end
there's
of the world,
some sort
right?
of event. I'm sure it's like
When Jesus, when they
yeah.
calls everyone. The
Okay.
Yeah, let's not. It'll
Let's
come
not
back to us. Yeah.
undermine our own. Yeah, our brains just collapse out now trying to think of this word. But that anyway, the floaty up to the sky, religious-y thing where yeah, and all the bad people get punished and all that stuff. So yeah, rather than there
Oh
being
yeah,
that
yeah,
kind
yeah.
of event, I think I'm probably going to wake up about 3 o'clock in the morning and start screaming like. So yeah, so rather than that happen, then maybe it's just yeah that's our life cycle. You know, we return back to the collective, integrate our sort of the knowledge that we picked up, and
Yeah, I
yeah, I've
think
certainly
so.
had that narrative
You know, I
fed to me.
think it makes sense, right? Well, there's certainly feels like there's this very strong, although it is so strange, so bizarre, so unlike our world, and yet it feels like there's a very strong sense that we've been there before, as you say, and so it is perhaps possible, or you can imagine that you know we come into our world, we pop into our consensus world for a very relatively brief period of time, and then we go back. You know, so we're just kind of like a dolphin leaping out of the water, right? And then it comes back down into it again. That's kind of what we're like dolphins. We're popping out into this reality, this little game. It's a lot of fun. It's kind of strange. And then we go back to the mother reality, if you like, which is far bigger and far older. Also age as well. I find that the DMT space, although it's very advanced, it seems like it's very, very old. This is a place that hasn't just popped up in the last 50 years or something. This is a place that has been around forever. You know, much longer than our little universe. It feels like this is a very, very old and grand and deep and highly developed place. Much
Yeah,
more than our
I think that's why
world.
it ties into
So all that
yeah,
kind
it
of
ties into
ties
that
in.
very. I think that's why you do get these strong sort of indigenous ties. So when you have these cultures of people who have such a focus on lineage and tradition and inheritance, that feel does very much come across. And this is like, yeah, this is ageless. It's timeless. This is like even like what is happening. It does not fit in like a sort of a linear time. This is just an event that is now sort of recorded in the sort of Akashic records or whatever you want to call it. It's just now in the strata of the universe. So yeah, it definitely all those kind of different features are all tying together. And there's one thing though, which I think maybe coupled with this subject, I read somewhere in your I'm pretty sure it was in your book anyway, talk around prenatal DMT, like as in that this is a so does that
Yeah.
then lend towards this feeling? Is that where the kind of this comes in before? And again, purely on an opinion based thing, but is it because this is like there is a womb based memory of being off our tits on DMT, or
Well, this is what I speculate in the book as well, is that we know that certainly in smaller mammals that DMT is produced in much higher levels until about just a few weeks before birth, then the levels start to drop. And so it seems possible, perhaps, that in humans too, that in the brain of the neonate, that DMT levels actually, or the brain of the fetus, should I say, not the neonate, that's the baby, right? Yeah, that's the baby. Yeah, the brain of the fetus might contain high levels of DMT than when you're born, and so you're kind of in the gestational period, your brain is actually experiencing. It's tuning in. It's starting to learn again. It's starting to learn how to construct this alternate reality before it has to start building the normal world when you leave. So that would fit in as well, and so then it really would be real, not just deja vu, but actually a true memory. You really have been there before, but before you could actually form proper memories, or at least memories that you can recall. You can directly retrieve. So that would make sense, I think. So I'm open to that idea that we came from in perhaps a very real sense, the DMT realm, in that we were experiencing the DMT realm whilst we were in our mother's womb. We weren't experiencing information from, you know, this environment, but the brain was already constructing this alternate reality, you know, still connected, if you like, in some way to the DMT world. And then we finally sever that cord, sever that connection when we burst into this reality a few months later.
Yeah.
And DMT levels drop, and we start absorbing information and start learning to construct this reality. So
you could probably go at it from the other angle, like if you want to be a bit far out, and you could. So, assuming that there is some kind of like universal collective, and that we are going to fragment off to inhabit this gestating infant, then yeah, maybe that's like, okay, let's start. We'll start smoothing the road. We'll use the simulator. So they put the DMT in, so that's the inroad for the branch of consciousness to slip in, and that's like, okay, there's a bit of VR stuff going on, and it's like, okay, are you ready for the full implant? Here we go. We're going to cut off the DMT supply, and then we're kind of doing the opposite to re-interface.
Yeah, exactly. It's. So I think there's different levels behind. We see one side, if you like, of that. We can measure DMT levels in the brain, or imagine DMT levels in the brain. But there's the other side as well. That's some of that connection to the other reality that we can't even understand how that works. We don't understand the interface between our reality. We don't even understand our own reality, right? We don't even understand the structure of our consciousness, where that comes from, and the structure of our universe. And so we certainly don't have an idea of how that interface works. If there is an interface between our reality and some other reality, you know, where that other reality is, and how is it connected? What does the connection look like? I just don't think we have the tools. We don't have the language. We don't have the technology. We don't have the sophistication yet to actually, you know, I do a kind of a sketchy attempt in alien information theory to how it might work, how that information can be gated by DMT, but we don't really understand how that interface might work.
Do we have an understanding on?
Yeah, go on.
The rapture.
The rapture.
Beautifully recalled. How could we forget the rapture? Yeah, I was thinking it's ascension, ascending, but no, it's the rapture. Thanks to our Christian friends.
Yeah.
In regards to the do we have an understanding of where this prenatal DMT appears from? And I guess this then ties into this thing around like which concept pops up around endogenous DMT. Is that now a thing? Is that sort of?
Yes, for sure. It comes from tryptophan. So all of the tryptamines in your body. So the main one, of course, is serotonin. Serotonin comes from tryptophan, which is an amino acid. It's an essential amino acid. It's also, tryptophan's kind of cool. It has the indole ring, right? You know, the indole ring of tryptamine. So you've got like a 6-membered ring, then you've got a 5-membered ring with nitrogen. This is indole. So tryptophan is tryptamine, but with a carboxyl, a CO2H, carboxylic acid group. So that's amino acid, tryptophan, very common. Then you decarboxylate it. You remove that in the body. There's an enzyme that does that, and that gives you tryptamine. Then where do you go from there? Well, you can add a hydroxyl group, an OH group, on the 5 position on the ring, and that gives you 5-hydroxytryptamine, which is serotonin. Alternatively, you can add 2 methyl groups, 2 carbon atoms with hydrogens on the amine, on the nitrogen, on the chain of the tryptamine. That gives you dimethyltryptamine. So all DMT in the body comes from tryptophan. And tryptophan is kind of a cool amino acid because it appears to be the last of the amino acids to evolve. So to appear in the world, the last one ever was tryptophan, which is kind of interesting. Also, it's the only, and Dennis McKenna pointed this out, every amino acid is encoded by what are called codons in the DNA. So you have 3, like GGA, right? That's glycine, I think. GGG is glycine. You got TAT or ATC. And each amino acid will have a number of 3-letter words that code for it. Now, there's only 2 amino acids that only have a single word for them. One of them is methionine. That's the starter amino acid. So it's the first amino acid in any protein. So it makes sense. There's only one word for that. That's the kind of very fundamental one. And then the other tryptophan. All the other amino acids can be coded. They're encoded by different combinations of bases. So that's just an interesting quirk that tryptophan is kind of stands out. Also in its structure as well, having this strange indole ring. It's a curious molecular motif, structural motif in the molecule. So yeah, tryptophan is kind of cool and also leads you into thinking about, and it produces DMT.
So is this something you think that we could tap into then? Because there's all these various exercises and stuff for people who claim to be able to stimulate sort of DMT production within the brain and tap into the experiences. Is that I must admit I've been somewhat skeptical of those things, but is this a like I say, is that a thing? Is it a possibility, you think, or is it just just what's your take on it?
I think it might be possible. I'm always somewhat skeptical when people tell me that they can generate DMT in their brain through breath work. A lot of people claim that they have DMT experiences. Now, if someone has a DMT-like experience, does that mean they're generating DMT in their brain? Not necessarily. Is it possible? Maybe. We know now that, or there's a very strong hypothesis that DMT is upregulated. Levels are increased in the brain quite rapidly in response to hypoxia. So when there's a lack of oxygen, a DMT is produced, and we think, or it's hypothesized by people like Dennis McKenna and a guy called Ede Fresca, who's working on this, that DMT is actually protective against cell death in response to hypoxia. So when your brain is starved of oxygen, low concentration oxygen environment, brain cells start to die, and then you die. You have a massive stroke, and then you stop living. So DMT, it's been shown, actually protects cells, nerve cells, neurons from cell death in a low oxygen environment. So then you start to think, oh, okay, so maybe when you're dying, as your heart stops beating, this DMT is being produced, and it's actually, should you come back to life, it's protecting the brain.
And this kind of justifies the near-death experience.
Then you think, okay, this justifies the near-death experience, right? So it's kind of cool. It fits in perfectly. Now, right, then you think, okay, where does the DMT come from? Is it produced by the brain? We know that the enzyme, the key enzyme, it's a methyltransferase enzyme, the enzyme that puts those two carbons on the nitrogen to make DMT, is found in the lung. The lung has a very large surface area. It's also, of course, obviously, it's closely related to the oxygen transport system, right? The gas diffusion, that kind of thing. So it might be a good place to put an oxygen. A system that would detect when oxygen levels are dropping or when the respiratory system is starting to fail, and then perhaps the lungs are producing DMT large, because the lungs would be capable of producing large amounts in a relatively short period of time. The pineal gland certainly is too small to be pumping.
Andrew, you've just ruined the entire video now. All the comments are filling up with hatred now. Don't you dare talk about my pineal gland.
I know,
Dr. Gallimore.
I know, I get it all the time. I need to decalcify my pineal, clearly. Defluoridate it or whatever. But so it's probably not the pineal. And Dave Nichols has done the calculations on how much it would need to produce to generate enough to create an NDE or to actually protect the brain. And it's almost certainly not the pineal that's producing it. It could be other cells in the brain. Other cells in the brain will be perfectly capable. So the brain itself, the larger the cortical structures, might be responsible for producing the DMT, or it could be the lungs, right? So then if you say, okay, maybe it's the lungs, then you think, okay, can we generate this state? Can we manipulate the breathing so as to mimic this hypoxic state without actually depriving the brain of oxygen? Are there breathing techniques that could generate and then lead to production of DMT? Okay. Maybe. Wim Hof thinks that DMT is produced when you do his breathing exercise. I mean, he just kind of, I think, made that up, or I mean, he believes it maybe, but no one's ever tested it. And it would be quite easy to test, to monitor some DMT levels in someone's blood whilst they were doing, certain breathing techniques, whether it's Wim Hof, whatever, or Stan Grof's holotropic breath work, or other types of breathing techniques. I don't rule it out, but I've not seen any convincing evidence that people are consciously able to stimulate the production of DMT. And
it would be very
cool
cool
if they could.
I think it's just one of those things where it kind of bugs me a little bit, because the language has just become so kind of fashionable that everything is DMT now, and it's like I've had people trying to say, oh yeah, you can do like certain closed eye visual techniques, and it's like you get DMT visuals. I'm like, dude, you've clearly not seen DMT visuals. It's not a mushy, it's not a coloured light. Yeah, coloured lights, very cool. That ain't what happening, so. And so I'm also similarly skeptical about people being able to meditate themselves into DMT states. It just.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if these people actually have used DMT as well, or whether they just imagine this is what DMT must be like, because maybe they see bright colours, and maybe they have quite an amazing experience that seems psychedelic. But unless they've actually taken DMT, they know exactly what the DMT state is. I don't know. Is the brain somehow able to recreate the DMT state in the absence of DMT under certain conditions? Maybe. It seems quite difficult for it to do so. It really needs that perturbation by this molecule to actually start the kind of reconfiguring of its world building.
Yeah, and I think that's not to take anything away from those meditative states before they all those people sort of go nuts in the comment section. But yeah, I just think there is something specific. There is a certain specific effect where you can point to it and say that is that, and it's not just the same as any other insightful or profound or trippy experience. I am conscious of the time, Andrew. I did just have, so I'll let you get off soon, but I did just have a couple of quick questions from some of the people in my community that they asked me to ask you. So these might be a little bit sort of more specific than mine. Let me just pull them up. So there was one in regards, which I think you actually answered earlier. From Database was asking, he's really interested in how long you've been able to maintain a DMT dosage via IV, and whether it has any impact on later dosages. A few years ago, the plan was a 25 milligram bolus plus 4.2 milligram drip. Has that changed? So yeah, I remember seeing a talk of yours, I think it was about 6 years ago, where your face was lighting up at the prospect of having people in this state for hours or days or something like that. But you mentioned, I think, 30 minutes earlier. Is that the maximum that you're aware of?
Yeah, I mean, of course, I'm not doing the experiments. I always have to tell people that, don't write to me and say, can I volunteer? I live in Japan. I don't do human DMT work here. So it's in London, yes, Imperial College. So the protocol that me and Rick produced was really a back of the envelope calculation, really, in scientific terms. It was not designed to be taken kind of straight out of the box, so to speak, and used in humans. So the Imperial College team did a much more detailed analysis in collaboration with a specialist pharmacokineticist an expert on drug metabolism, and built a much better model than myself and Rick were able to produce. And they're using that. The actual infusion rate and all of that stuff is not available yet. So when they publish the paper, so they finished the first kind of trial with a limited number of people, over 30 minutes, really, just to test at different dosage levels, the different levels of experience. And presumably, I asked him a few days ago, but I don't know yet exactly when he's going to publish this. But then the protocol will be out there. People... I mean, I don't imagine people are in their homes are going to be setting up these infusion devices. I wouldn't recommend it.
We'll be knocking them together into Coke bottles, and we used to make bongs out of all manner of things when we were kids. So yeah, I dread to see some sort of Frankenstein infusion devices. things that'll be.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the thing is, these infusion devices, they're not expensive at all.
No,
I mean,
no.
probably shouldn't say that, but I mean, it's how you use them. I mean, syringes obviously aren't expensive either, and these infusion devices, they're not complicated. It's a box attached to, it's got a little calculator basically in it where you program the infusion rate. And add a cannula into someone's arm, which needs to be done by a doctor, and then or a nurse, and then.
Yeah, I think I'm going to start a GoFundMe request after this video too. Yeah, buy me an infusion machine, everyone. Send your donation.
Maybe $300 or $400 would get you an infusion machine. So it's not crazy.
Okay.
Crazy.
The next one was probably quite a big question. So I don't know, maybe you could give the small version, the quick notes. My question for Andrew Gallimore is:
the elevator.
Does he agree with Penrose's view that consciousness is more than a computation and it cannot be replicated algorithmically? Just in a sentence, Andrew.
I'm not going to second guess Roger Penrose on questions of computability of consciousness. I don't know. I don't. From what I've read, I mean, Roger Penrose is extremely, I mean, Nobel laureate in physics or in mathematics and physics. So Penrose is a very smart guy. He's not a very good communicator, unfortunately. It's very difficult to understand him sometimes, or what his point is. I've been to some of his lectures and he's spoken about his theories of consciousness. He uses like acetates.
Wow!
Like from
overhead projectors,
early 90s. Yeah, he's got a projector, like a flip thing. He's got an acetate. It's kind of quite cool to watch. Proper old school. He doesn't have PowerPoint or Keynote or anything like that. Yeah, it's fascinating. All handwritten. Anyway, yeah. So, I've been to his lectures. I've read about his orchestrated objective reduction or whatever it's called. OR theory of consciousness with Stuart Hameroff. It's never struck. I didn't read it and think, oh my god, this is it. I read it and thought, I don't know. I don't see the explanatory power of it. I don't see what it explains. The idea that these quantum events inside microtubules are creating consciousness. Or something. I'm probably misrepresenting the theory entirely. But anyway, maybe I don't understand it properly.
Didn't ring your bell.
In short, I don't know. I avoid consciousness directly. I avoid the discussion of consciousness directly because I don't know what it is. I know that I have it, but nobody. This is still a philosophical question, right? What is consciousness? Is it emergent? Is it fundamental? Is it produced by the brain? Is it transmitted into the brain? All these different questions. I avoid it because I don't take a particular position on it. My position is always the informational structure, the content, the dynamics of your world is represented in your brain. Why is that informational structure? Why does it have a subjective quality? Why does it feel like something for the brain to be building those structures? I never get into that because I simply don't know what consciousness is or how it's generated or where it's from.
There we go. And then I think the last one it would be a bit of a more of a generalized one. What is your opinion on the kind of the psychedelic renaissance, the legalization, the expansion of psychedelics, and the fact that people are now buying $400 infusion machines based on what you've just said? So, as it's in terms of like the phenomena of what's happening, happening on many levels. Just first of all, people being able to find these things thanks to things like the internet. The way that's happening, the legalization, good thing, bad thing, any anxieties around it, like. What's your thoughts?
I think it can only be a good thing. I think the concern. I mean, certainly, I'm a cognitive liberty kind of guy. I don't think any government should be controlling what you put into your body. They shouldn't be controlling what states of mind or states of consciousness you are and are not allowed to access. I think that's an absurd idea. So certainly, legalization of these molecules is obviously a good thing. It can only be a good thing in principle for cognitive liberty, for the right to enter whatever state of consciousness we want. Are there concerns? Sure. Certainly people are concerned about the commodification, if you like, of psychedelics. Of every day you seem to see some new patent being filed for some particular use, and people are concerned about that. And there's one, I won't mention any names, but there's one or two quite large academic groups that are making a point, or that seem to making a habit of trying to patent everything they do, ways of using psilocybin, strange variations on drug delivery, just trying to make it novel so that they can get a patent on it and restrict other people doing it. I think they wanted to patent using psilocybin with music or something, in a therapeutic setting.
Certain configurations of couches and soft play sort of things, I'd say.
Yeah, exactly. That this is now a patented setup. So obviously there are concerns there, and that's only going to intensify, I think, as psychedelics become much more mainstream, particularly as psychiatric treatments in medicine. You're going to see that tension between people wanting to make money by patenting certain molecules or certain processes, and those that have a more altruistic approach, who actually want to help people and have these drugs available to whoever needs them. So you're going to see that, I think. I'm slightly separate from that because I'm not into so much the clinical aspects. I don't talk about that. I'm into the stranger aspects. I think there's always a danger that when something like DMT does become kind of saturates the mainstream, it does become extremely available. You're going to start to see scare stories. People, particularly when people can buy these vape pens, on the internet for very little. And it's so convenient now for people to access DMT, and everyone should have the right to access DMT, of course. But you are going to see more scare stories. You're going to see headlines of these danger drug. Student goes crazy after smoking these alien crack or whatever. They'll give it some.
That is no its name. That is I'm alien crack. We're gonna roll on.
Well, they used to, that nitrous. Used to call it, the newspapers used to call it hippie crack, and I've never heard anyone call it hippie crack, but the newspapers, nitrous oxide also.
It reminds me. Did you ever see the episode of Brass Eye where it was taking the piss out of and they're like, cake, and all the
cake,
names that they came up for, and you can almost imagine some of these things getting into the media. I can't remember some. Well, hippie crack and alien crack.
Yeah. So alien crack. So you can imagine some very negative publicity for alien crack, also known as DMT, and that doesn't help. It's not good when it gets a lot of negative attention. So I think there needs to be a continued effort to let people know, to educate people.
Also, I think it has a kind of people, there's like an additional strand to the negative PR, because I think there could be something similar to salvia. Salvia at one point was very widely available and has these very similar reality switch effects, but just kind of became known as the wacky thing that teenagers are acting like bellends on. And I think for DMT to inherit that kind of label, I think it would kind of miss the point somewhat and sort of turn people off to the possibility of it, because nobody wants to be the screaming teenager on the floor telling that they've been eaten by intergalactic caterpillars or something.
Yeah, I think the good thing with salvia, there was a brief period where every day there'd be a new YouTube video, or it'd pop up on my Facebook of, oh my God, what's this? The wildest salvia trip, and they'd be 100x or something, take a bong of it, and they'd start doing crazy things. But I think with DMT, although it is just in many senses as intense as high dose salvia, people don't normally act out on DMT. It's normally, they look like they're sleeping, even if they're having the wildest experience. They don't tend to. They tend to be somewhat paralyzed almost. Whereas with salvia, people actually start to act out and do kind of crazy things. So that maybe is a little bit in DMT's favor. But these things pass, they pass through, they become a little flash of publicity that you get, and they become a kind of a cultural moment. And that might happen with DMT.
Well, one thing's
Maybe
sure,
it's already happened.
we'll hopefully we'll both be around to find out and see how this plays out over the next coming decades. You've been very generous with your time, Andrew. Just want to give you an opportunity. Is there anything you want to point people towards? I'll do the shameless plug again.
Yes. Yeah. So please, Reality Switch Technologies. This is my latest book, which is I can confidently say it's the most detailed and comprehensive guide to how psychedelics work in the brain. Available anywhere in the world in any language. It's in English. All classes of psychedelics, the classic psychedelics, DMT, psilocybin, etc., plus things like ketamine and the tropane alkaloids, as well as salvia. I talk about how they interface with the brain and how they change the structure and dynamics of your world. So please do buy this. It's on Amazon. It's also on my website, alieninsect.net. Or buildingalienworlds.com. You can find my books there. Also, follow me on Twitter. Of course, Twitter's still alive. Alien Insect. I post on there quite regularly my kind of ideas and thoughts about psychedelics. So if you want to kind of more of a stream of my thinking, then follow me on Twitter and my YouTube channel, also Alien Insect. I have a whole free course on psychedelic neuroscience, which is, I think there's like 70 videos or something like that, 8 units. So yeah, if people want to learn about how DMT is actually working in the brain and other psychedelics working in the brain, then
I would just add that
that's it.
Reality Switch Technology is not just in English. It's in English and Japanese, and I've had a lot of fun sitting with. I've had an intimate relationship with my phone and Google Translate, trying to pull the sort of the hidden message, which I actually realised it reminded me a lot of kind of sort of Final Fantasy game books of like, what's the extra. So I do really love these kind of extra level, the extra mile that you go with the layer to these books. I think is really great, Andrew. It really is an experience reading them. And thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for the work you're doing. I've very much enjoyed talking with you. Like I say, go and check out all your stuff and. Yeah, leave it there, mate. Thank you very much.